The pandemic and the uprisings have raised fundamental questions about what the state does and does not, and for who has to work in what form and for what pay, and the interdependence of all of our lives. We have 18 million people unemployed in the country, and as you were saying, 20 million people face possible eviction and houselessness by the fall. And the response from Trump and Tim Cook recently was to tell Americans to find something new. We had the one-time $1,200 payout from the feds and various forms of closings of housing court, which are now coming to a close, as you mentioned. There has been a total lack of imagination and, more importantly, political will to respond to the basic human needs of people. And if this is not the purpose of our coming together and electing people to represent us, we should be asking some hard questions of what the purpose of the state is. But I want to take a moment to unpack cancel rent and defund the police, which are two really important demands that organizers and social movements are making across the country. Police and private property are central defining institutions of life in the United States. We know the centrality of police to local budgets now and the immense power that they have and their sprawling scale, because it has been on spectacular display for the last 2 months since Minneapolis police killed George Floyd. But it might be worth taking a moment to talk about private property, which is also everywhere and structures our everyday lives, but is arguably a bit more subterranean in how it does. Private property is the basis of our legal regime. It's a settler regime, a capitalist regime, a racial regime. It creates these relationships where some people own property and most people don't. And if you don't own property, you have to pay for it. This is pretty weird if you think about it. We are human. We have physical bodies. We need space to exist, to sleep, to eat, to take care of one another. But we live in a society where you need to pay for space to live. The private property regime then creates a direct contradiction with people meeting people's needs. And so both police and private property are rooted in the histories of enslavement and conquest. They are not systems rooted in collective care and social provision. And it's not as if we have the police over here and private property over there. These are fundamentally interconnected institutions that prop one another up. They are central to the stories, the structures, and the relationships that sustain things as they are. And so it might be helpful to think for a moment about the connection between these institutions, because part of what I argued in the piece is kind of this radical imagination coming out of today's social movements that's telling interwoven stories about the world that we live in and the world that we must build. So many police killings around the country have happened in gentrifying neighborhoods, including here in Columbus, where Columbus police killed Tyree King, Henry Green, and Julius Tate, young black men and boys in gentrifying neighborhoods. Police arrest people for stealing food to eat or selling loosies to survive or living under a bridge or squatting in a home when they have nowhere else to go. And all over the country, sheriff's offices work with landlords to evict people who can't pay their rents. And so contrary to this popular idea that we have the market over here and the state over there, we see that the state works to protect the more powerful players in the market by lending them untold volumes of arsenal. And of course, central to the defund demand is precisely this critique of neoliberalism, that the state has been stripped of virtually all of its provisioning function, which we see on spectacular display right now in response to COVID-19. We don't guarantee housing, we don't guarantee food, we don't guarantee health care or PPE. Instead, all of our tax dollars are going to prisons, police, and jails to sustain things as they are, enact so much violence on poor, working class, black and brown people, and distract us from the real work of collective care and social provision. And so the pandemic and the uprising have put a magnifying glass on how the most powerful institutions in the most powerful country on earth have absolutely failed to meet the needs of the vast majority of Americans.